When looking back at the way history remembers Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys Targaryen, the three heads of the dragon who conquered Westeros, it's easy to forget that these three monolithic figures were real people, with personalities and complex relationships. The idea gets even more complicated when you consider that despite the key role both Visenya and Rhaenys would play, not just in the Conquest, but its aftermath is remembered solely as Aegon's conquest, with his two sisters and wives playing second fiddle to Aegon himself. But at the same time, we know far more about Visenya and Rhaenys as people than Aegon himself, with him almost becoming an enigma of a person, which in turn has added to the legend that is Aegon the Conqueror, with the relatively blank canvas he presents, making it easy for historians and small folk with generations to paint him as the figure of Targaryen dominance they needed him to be. But with the information we have about Aegon and his sisters, we can piece together a rough picture of what they were like as people and the complex relationship dynamic between them. You're a fool and a weakling, nephew. Do you think any man would have ever dared speak so to your father? You have a dragon. Use him. Fly to Old Town and make this starry sept another Harrenhal, or give me leave and let me roast this pious fool for you, Visenya Targaryen. To King Rhaenys I, Fire and Blood, the sons of the dragon. Visenya Targaryen was the eldest of the three siblings, born in 29 BC, which would have made her 27 years of age at the start of Aegon's conquest. She possessed, like both of her siblings, the classical Valyrian features of silver gold hair, which she often braided or bound up in rings, and of course, purple or violet eyes. While no doubt beautiful, like all of the blood of old Valyria, Visenya's was a harsher and more austere beauty than her sister Rhaenys. While described as a passionate and driven woman, Visenya was also stern, serious, and unforgiving to those who dared to cross her. She was followed by rumours that she dabbled in the dark arts of sorcery and played with poisons and potions. But we cannot know how much of this is fact and how much of this is pure speculation, based on her rough and unforgiving character, with her foes wishing to discredit her. From a young age, Visenya trained with Aegon in the yard at Dragonstone, with her becoming a skilled warrior, some say more skilled with a blade than Aegon the Conqueror himself. She wielded the Valyrian steel blade Dark Sister, a slim, slender blade, suited better for the hands of a female fighter than Aegon's bastard sword, Blackfire. Visenya was wed to her brother Aegon, following the Valyrian custom of sibling marriages. However, Aegon also took their younger sister, Rhaenys, as a wife as well. While polygamy did happen in Old Valyria, it was far less common. What is not wholly clear if the marriage between Aegon and Rhaenys occurred at the same time as Visenya's marriage to Aegon, or sometime later. Regardless, people claim that Aegon had wed Visenya out of duty, and Rhaenys out of desire. Given what we know of the relationship between Aegon and Visenya, this statement appears to be at least in some degree true. While Visenya clearly loved her brother, it was a very different love than that of Rhaenys. Some time prior to her wedding, Visenya became a dragon rider, having bonded with the dragon Vhagar, the second largest and second oldest of the three Targaryen dragons at the time of Aegon's conquest. I will not fight you, nor will I kneel to you. Dawn has no king. Tell your brother that. I shall. But we will come again, princess, and the next time we shall come with fire and blood. Miro Martell and Rhaenys Targaryen, Fire and Blood, Aegon's Conquest. Rhaenys was the youngest of the three Targaryen siblings who conquered Westeros. In many ways, she was everything her sister Visenya was not. Playful, curious, impulsive, given to countless flights of fancy. We don't know for certain the age of Rhaenys, but it is implied that she was 2 years younger than her brother Aegon, making her 23 or 24 years old at the start of the conquest. While Visenya spent hours in the training yard honing her skills at arms, Rhaenys was no true warrior and possessed only basic understanding of combat and swordplay. She loved music, dancing and poetry, and was the patron and supported many a singer, mummer, puppeteer and artist, which is something that would become much more prominent when House Targaryen set up their court in King's Landing, with Rhaenys herself having a huge impact on the atmosphere and tone of the court in the Aegon fort. Out of all three siblings, she by far spent the most time on Dragonback, more than her brother and sister put together. She always talked about one day flying her dragon Meraxes out across the Sunset Sea to see what lands lay beyond. Rhaenys was said to be a beautiful woman, with silver gold hair, which she kept long and wore loose, with purple eyes and a slender waist, and the pure definition of Valyrian beauty. It's clear that Rhaenys and Aegon had a very different relationship than Aegon and Visenya, given that Aegon had chosen to marry Rhaenys out of love rather than the duty in which he married Visenya. There are some that claim that for every 10 nights he spent with Rhaenys, he would spend one with Visenya. Like every king and queen that sat the Iron Throne, detractors tend to try and spin rumours and tales to discredit them. Given this unique marital arrangement between the three Targaryen siblings, it's not surprising some of these detractors, speculated to be members of the faith who took issue with the incestuous nature of House Targaryen, would seek to tarnish their legacy. Rumours exist when it comes to Aegon and his sisters, like any and every king of Westeros. One of these rumours suggests that while no one questioned Visenya Targaryen's fidelity to her brother and husband, Rhaenys is said to have surrounded herself with comely young men, and it was whispered, even entertained some in her bedchambers on the nights when Aegon was with her elder sister. But the issue is, like most rumours of the sort, there is little to no evidence that indicates there's any truth to these tales, with most taking it as baseless speculation and conjecture. Aegon the Conqueror brought fire and blood to Westeros, but afterwards he gave them peace, prosperity, and justice. Daenerys Targaryen to her supporters. A Storm of Swords, Chapter 71. Daenerys 6. While we know a reasonable amount about Aegon's sisters, we in fact know very little of substance about the man himself. Aegon was born in 27 BC, making him only 25 years of age when he landed on the shores of the Blackwater Rush, on the site of what would become King's Landing. Much of what we do know about him is through his actions and his relationships with the people around him. Armed with the Valyrian steel blade Blackfire, he was counted amongst the greatest warriors of his age. Yet he took no pleasure in feats of arms, and never rode in tourneys or fought in melees. It is believed he was trained alongside his sister Visenya, whom it was said was a much more competent warrior on a technical level. While we don't know when he claimed his dragon, it is speculated it was sometime before his marriage to his sisters. His mount was Balerion the Blackdread, the largest and the oldest of the Targaryen dragons, and the last remaining of the 5 Aenar the Exile had brought with him from Valyria to Dragonstone before the Doom. Aegon did not possess the natural love of flying his sister Rhaenys did. He flew only to battle, or to travel quickly across land and sea. His commanding presence drew men to his banner, yet he had no close friends or confidants, save for one, Orys Baratheon, the companion of his youth and his bastard half-brother. It is said he trusted no man more than Orys Baratheon. Women were drawn to him, but Aegon remained ever faithful to his sisters, or so the tales claim. As king, he put great trust in his small council and his sisters, leaving much of the day-to-day governance of the realm to them. Yet he did not hesitate to take command when he found it necessary. Though he dealt harshly with rebels and traitors, he was open-handed with his former foes who bent the knee, something which during the Conquest would bring allies to his banner. The way in which George R. R. Martin has written the lore around Aegon Targaryen, while minimal, I think is very fitting within the context of what Fire and Blood is trying to be. A fictional history book, written hundreds of years after the fact. When you take a look at real-world historical figures, there is only so much we can ever truly know about them as people, and it's often framed through their actions and relationships with those around them. Yes, we know who, say, William the Conqueror was, and his role in the history of England, but in terms of his personal life, we know far more about him than we do Aegon Targaryen, but it's still very much limited when compared to the kings that come a few generations later, closer to the time period said history books were being written. For example, by the time you get to, say, the Tudors, we have a much more clearer picture of the personal lives of the likes of Henry VIII. You can also see this reflected in Fire and Blood. While the timescale of Fire and Blood is only about 300 years, compared to the 1,000 years of English history in comparison, you can still see the progression through the Targaryen kings, with us really having a much clearer picture of these kings as people after the reign of Aegon. It's very easy to dismiss Fire and Blood as pointless fictional history, but for what it is, it's really been thought out and executed well by George R. R. Martin. When you read it really does feel like I'm reading a real history book, and part of achieving that is selectively withholding information that realistically Mace's writing a book such as Fire and Blood wouldn't have access to. Is why I appreciate the fact that Fire and Blood doesn't shy away from having conflicting sources of information, as it leaves it up to the reader to interpret these sources in a way they see as correct, based on how they have read the information. My version of what might be the true telling of events might be widely different from your own. Even as far back as the Conquest, George has left these conflicting sources and rumours, allowing the reader to make up their own mind, with this clearly being the most obvious during the Dance of the Dragons. And that is the issue I think House of the Dragon was always going to face. If we ignore some of the more blatant changes it made from the books, regarding characters, ages and relationships, with some altogether being cut, what House of the Dragon is presenting to the viewer is an interpretation of a true telling of events in Fire and Blood, specifically Ryan Condal and Sarah Hess's interpretation of events. And that is kind of fundamentally the huge issue with the show that the show was always going to have. Reading Fire and Blood is a very subjective and personal experience for the reader, given the agency George R. R. Martin has given each reader to make up their own mind. Thus, when so many readers' interpretations of events conflict with Condal and Hess's, it was always going to cause problems. There are still fundamental changes Condal and Hess have made to the narrative that have nothing to do with interpretation, clear changes they have made, but the issue with the subjective nature of Fire and Blood was always going to be problematic. This was always going to be the downside of adapting a book like Fire and Blood, and is something the writers of the Aegon's Conquest spin-off are going to have to also face as well. However, given how little we know about Aegon and his sisters as people when compared to the characters from the Dance of the Dragons, it does give them a little more wiggle room to make the characters who the story needs them to be. The Aegon's Conquest TV show, while it will face some of the issues House of the Dragon has faced adapting Fire and Blood, it will have a whole other plethora of issues it will need to overcome. But that's a discussion for another day.